I believe in giving credit where credit is due. So before we get into the episode, we are going to name our sponsors. So the sponsors of season 4 are Levo Oil. They were gracious enough to give us a home infuser to be able to make some amazing recipes this season. If you are someone who has been wanting to make infusions at home a little bit easier, definitely check out shop.levooil.com and see if there's something you just have to have in your kitchen. In addition to Temperance Home and Bar. I love Melissa. Melissa has been a true sponsor of our show, working on almost every season with us, and I just love her Botanica. Melissa goes above and beyond to ensure that all of her clients leave super duper happy and are in a better spiritual place than when they came. Please check out the show notes so you can follow her on social media and check out her Etsy page. Let's get into the episode. Thank you for listening to another episode of Tu Tia Bruja. I'm Bex Carlos, and this season's coming to an end. Yeah, so for this one, our season finale is going to technically be in 2 parts. I recorded 2 episodes with Laura Davila. You might know her as Daphne La Hechicera on Instagram. So I recorded in 1 English episode and 1 Spanish episode. And I've been on this focused mission of trying to make peace with Catholicism, especially Mexican Catholicism, because it's not the same thing, right? It's different. It's a different variation. It's a infusion of various traditions. And I feel like Laura came at a time where I really just needed some of that guidance and some of those resources to really dig into myself. I'm really excited to share with you my conversation with Laura. So something I love about the internet, especially the Mexican community, is like it's so easy to find other people, right? Because we're all sharing each other's content. We're all like in the similar spaces. Today, I'm really excited because, I've been chipping away at my issues with Catholicism. Like that's my own problem, I don't have to be, and not that I'm, projecting onto people, but for the longest space, I think Tutea Brihab was a space for non-Catholic and non-really God-believing witches, but I was like, that's really accusatory of like people, and I don't fucking like that. That's gross. That's really policing. So for today, I'm really excited to have Daphne La Hechicera on the podcast. Thank you for being here.
Hi, how are you?
I love what you're doing because it's reminding me of stuff that like my abuela would have done and practiced. And it's just sort of those traditions that are with us, whether or not we are Catholic, just because it's ingrained in who we are. So how did you start your page, and how have you started growing everything that you're doing?
Well, I started in the community 1 year and 2 months ago. I've been practicing, I don't know, I don't remember. I think I was like 7 because my grandparents used to do this to make a living. Both of them used to do readings, trabajos, hechizos, amarres, salaciones, desalojos, destierros, everything. So that's how I grew up. They had a big collection of books of magic. So my grandpa used to be way more into the occult aspect of magic, ceremonial magic, and he was actually Rosicrucian. And my grandma had more this like folk aspect of the practice. So I had pretty much the 2 sides very present since I was growing. I immigrated here like 12 years ago, so my English is not what it is today, and a lot of people ask me why I didn't start it before to sharing my practices and blogging, but they don't understand that I was through a really long, expensive, and really hard immigration process where here, even though everybody believes in the United States we have freedom of religion, is not like that for people who are in the situation as I was. So I didn't want to jeopardize my immigration status or my opportunity to become a legal, citizen of the United States, and even less my two oldest son. So anything that had to do with brujeria, Santa Muerte, San Judas Tadeo, I tried to put like not even mention it, because there is a lot of situations and people who advise me not to do it, because they could be like related in their minds, which I don't understand why, with gangs, with drugs, with situations like that. So I tried to keep my practice very secretly, or at least not on social platforms. So the thing is, like, I started 1 year ago in social media because I fixed my status, I fixed my son's status, and I didn't feel like I was putting them at risk anymore. So that's how everything started. Besides, my English improved a lot in the last 3 years or so, my marriage, and that's how I decided, let me start like sharing what I do, what I learn. And it was a way for me to belong a community, because when I was a child, we tend to move a lot. So it was hard for me to keep in one place. And then when I immigrated to the United States, my husband works in logistics. So it's really hard because we have to move like really often. So for me, it was like, oh, it's so cool. Let me like start, making friends online and being part of a community, sharing stuff that I really like, without feeling like I'm the widow, because, it's not easy to be like the granddaughter of the person who is considered the bruja in your hometown. Right now, yes, it's a reason to be really proud of. But in the past, when I was 9 or 10, I used to be bullied because of that.
There's still a lot of policing of people and how they should be. We talked about this in the previous recording in Spanish about how, like, sometimes our own kinfolk, like Mexicans and Mexican Americans, can be the most judgmental of who we are.
Oh, yeah.
And so I can only imagine being the bruja in town.
Yeah, and it's not the same when, all of our grandmas did this in their house, in secret, in their place, But my grandma used to do this for a living. And my grandpa used to have like newspaper announcements, like broadcasting he was doing readings. It's just not something that I was able to hide.
I don't know. It's they're both a part of us, right? Like being able to have these things these traditions that come from a lot of our different ancestors, and also the Catholicism aspect of it. Because it's been interesting. Your profile has come at a time where I feel like I've been more hyper aware of how split even the Bruja community is about whether or not to use Catholicism in their practice. Like there's so many people who are like very anti and want to decolonize, or what they think is their method of decolonizing. And I will say that for a while I was a part of that. I was a little maybe blinded there. But it's also just like we have to acknowledge that like brujeria would not exist without Catholicism, because it was a way for these practices and traditions to carry on in plain sight. And because I like to come from everything from an academic perspective, like I like to understand, well, why did this happen? So the reason that this was allowed and traditions carried on is during the Mexican Inquisition, which was a part of like the Spanish Inquisition, there was the changing of hands from like Isabella ruling to Philip. And he basically allowed bishops to, if it wasn't offensive, if it wasn't blasphemous, people were allowed to carry on, because they were trying to force all of these different indigenous people to Catholicism. So that makes sense to me why so many things continued on, because it wasn't offensive. If you practiced herbalism, that was allowed to continue, because who is that bothering? Maybe making a tea or whatever. That's the way they see it. They don't think about all the healing and the medicine there. So I don't know. It's just really rad.
The confusion really come from like people think like as brujas in Mexico, they follow the dogma as the church will do it. I think they don't understand like we kept the mysticism, we kept the beliefs, but without keeping the men telling us what to do or how to live our lives, or without the dogma at all. So that's what I think the confusion uh, comes from. And it really needs to be said that drawing a line between Catholicism and Mexican magic is totally useless for people who practice brujeria. Just to pretty much like trying to hold water in our hands and stretching them out in front of us. there is no point because it does not add or taking anything from this practice, because our faith or what we believe into is not contained into the buildings or the people like preaching, but that's where I think like people has like, oh my god, I'm doing this, and has all this religious context and is so like conflicting why I'm doing this, but at the same time I believe in this. Is just because we don't believe as a regular Orthodox Catholic would do, so that's my take. I think people doesn't understand, like, for a Mexican bruja, the church is a means, not an end. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's totally justified. And if people has the religious trauma, there is no way, like, if you want to call it Mexican brujeria, we can take the Catholicism out of it, because otherwise you're practicing something else.
It is important and to acknowledge that when you don't embrace at least the Catholicism, because I'm a cultural Catholic. I like the imagery. I think, there's a lot of meaning in specific things, but it doesn't invoke all the same things for me as it does other people, which is fine. All of our practices are our own and we have to figure out the things that work, but we also have to be like very aware of context and history, and we can't just reinvent things that, they didn't happen. And I think that that's something that I see a lot with folks, when they're trying to create a practice of their own. It's like wishful thinking will not get you there. You have to embrace all parts of our ancestry. We are very unfortunate to have the oppressor and the oppressed within us, but it's only, I think, when we can learn to heal those things, when we don't see a lot of these toxic behaviors that we see. Like, for example, I feel like there's a lot of policing on what is and what isn't
Oh yeah.
in the Bruja community. And I think that that comes from unhealed generational trauma and just trying to be like, okay, well, this is allowed and this is not allowed.
Or who can practice and who cannot.
Yeah.
That's something that I laugh because, I have seen, and I know I'm going to get maybe a backslash from this. Like, I have seen a lot of people, "Hey, can I practice?" Like, they're asking me permission. Like, and I'm like, of course you can practice. Like, doesn't matter if the people doesn't understand, like, Mexicanicity is not a race. It's not an ethnicity. It's not just like a nationality. So Mexican magia belongs to a lot of cultures, not only the Aztecs or the indigenous part or the native part. It belongs to the European side, the African side. So if it's like a super like multi-diverse practice, why somebody will not be able to practice, and I have seen a lot of that. I have seen a lot of like people being afraid of practice because they're afraid to do something wrong, and or being like mocked because they're not Mexican enough either. It's just so sad, because as something that I have the idea that it started, as a way to protect our practices from appropriation. I'm starting to feel like we're not going to erase it if we continue this path, because everybody's afraid to practice, you know?
Like you said, being Mexican is not a race. So there are all different shades and colors and whatnot of us. But I think that sometimes because people are lighter, they are told that they can't practice.
Or because they don't speak Spanish, or because they're not, fully Mexican or born there. It's just so, so sad.
Yeah. I see, because like the thing, it becomes an issue for me personally when you have people who are trying to just make their money off magic and they claim everything that pops up on their 23andMe. You are not immersed in that many cultures. Like you had mentioned in the previous like recording, some of us have Jewish ancestry, some of us have Roma ancestry. There's like all these different things that we don't acknowledge and we don't talk about enough because a lot of people are just not aware, and there's so many connections that we do have connections to, but we don't necessarily acknowledge it. And, at one point are things not allowed? It's just Sometimes it's unclear. I think now we are kind of swimming in territories where we've never swam before. And it's like people are being more conscious of like, is this something that I'm allowed in? What is, but I think that sometimes with that, it gets a little too restrictive. So I hopefully with time we'll figure that out. I do like that the community can be so welcoming though. Instagram has been a really valuable resource for me to find that community and find people who have similar beliefs that I do. Has it been a really successful place for you?
Well, I really like Instagram, and more because I think I have get to like know a lot of people. And that was my goal at the beginning, just to make community. It wasn't a book deal. It wasn't to grow big following in 1 year. It wasn't to have, like the spotlight. It was to make community, to know people who were interested in the same things that I was, for the first time feel as like a belonging to something or somewhere, because as an immigrant, and now that I have 12 years here and I'm married to a guy who works in logistics and who has the management of trucking, is always moving, so I needed to have like something more like permanent. So that was my goal. I already won because I have met awesome people this year. I love Instagram in that regard. And I've been like really lucky in regard that, even though like I talk a lot about La Virgen or angels or saints, I don't have that. I don't have attacks, and everybody gets like amazed by the fact I don't bring Catholicism into magic. And I think I don't have that, not because my account is like super small, because now I think it's a decent number, on Instagram, because the algorithm is so bad. It's just because I'm not trying to recruit anybody. It's just like I put my stuff out there. If you like it, if you can get benefit from that, that's awesome. If not, keep scrolling, because I'm not going to convince you of anything. I'm just, being really honest. I understand that, brujeria, hechiceria, folk Mexican magic has a lot to do with the state or the place on the map of Mexico where you grew up. You're not going to use the same materials if you grew up in Veracruz, where you have a lot of, ocean surrounding you, that somebody who like grew up in Monterrey and has a lot of mountains and different weather and climate, it will be impossible to be like, oh, there is a uniform way for them on how to work. But there is a uniform way on the mechanics. There is a uniform way in the goals, the components of our magic.
Well, thank you so much for that reminder and for being here. Where is the best place for everyone to find you?
My Instagram, Daphne La Hechicera, and the same one, but it's Laura, the Laura Davila at Twitter. I just have two accounts.
And you have a Patreon too, right?
Yes, if you go to my Instagram, you can get the 3 link there.
And all of the links will also be included in the show notes. Thank you again for being here today. This was a great conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you again for listening. I am so thrilled that we made it through this season. Cannabis was such a key player in this season, and I feel like, if anything, it's something that made me kind of ease up on my opinions of Catholicism, because it's okay if it's not part of my practice, but I do have to understand and get used to the idea that it's part of the reason that the traditions I practice today are here. So thank you again to Laura. This has been a great episode. All of the ways to follow her and get in touch with her are in the show notes, and I look forward to season 5. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Yeah.